Canada taking to the airwaves in the U.S. A television advertisement highlighting the relationship between the two countries. It comes as President-elect Trump threatens tariffs on Canadian goods coming into the U.S. 7 News reporter Thomas Caffarella shows us more of this advertisement and speaks with economists on both sides of the border to learn what things could cost more if Trump's tariffs do happen.
For generations, this ally to the north has been by your side. Ontario, Canada.
That's the message the Ontario government wants Americans to understand as it airs its ads during NFL football games and on Fox News this month. The 60-second video, while not mentioning tariffs, comes after President-elect Donald Trump says he will impose a 25% tariff on Canadian products if the country doesn't act to stop illegal drugs and immigrants from crossing the border.
A long-standing economic partnership keeps millions of Americans working.
Jason Dean is an economics professor at King's University College in Ontario.
A 25% tariff would be quite catastrophic and definitely would, hamper relations between both countries.
Dean adds tariffs could have Americans seeing higher price tags on major items that come from Canada, including automobiles. They are a major export from Canada to the U.S.
80% of Canadian auto exports go to the United States. So And most of the manufacturing is done in Ontario.
Where else could Americans see higher prices? At the gas pump. One of the biggest U.S. imports from Canada is oil. Greg Gardner, an economics professor at SUNY Potsdam, says if a 25% tariff hits Canada, all things oil-related could spike in price.
Oil, energy, winds up in every product. You can't build a product without consuming some energy.
Lastly, lumber. It could cost more with Trump's tariffs. According to the Canadian government, the largest export market for lumber is the United States. Trump made a post on Truth Social Tuesday regarding conversations between himself and Prime Minister Trudeau about tariffs. Trump called tariffs spectacular for all and referred to Canada as a state. Thomas Caffarella, 7 News.